Hello, everyone. We know the last thing you need is another fitness podcast to catch you up on the newest trends, fad diets that are based on popular opinion and not research. Enter myself, Marianna, on the other end. We made Fitness Stuff for Normal People podcast to make exercise and nutrition science practical. Our goal is to expose misinformation in this industry by providing only evidence-based education, where today we're doing another one of our favorites, which is studies that blew our minds. We're going to be talking about studies that overlook dietary fiber intake and different health metrics that come along with that. And then on the other end, going into the strength training and hypertrophy world and looking at different rep ranges, total volume, and things like that.
Yes, but first, we want to give a special shout out to one of our sponsors of the podcast, Legion. They're a recent sponsor, so we're really excited about that. We have both used Legion for quite some time, so it's a great fit for a variety of reasons beyond just them having amazing products. They also work with an entire scientific review board. Every article, podcast, video they produce is vetted by a team of medical doctors, those with PhDs, and other professionals. So this is actually great for the Studies That Blew Our Mind episode, as they fund scientific research into nutrition, exercise, supplementation to help advance our collective understanding of how we can live a fitter and healthier life. So their ethics and goals completely align with our own, which is so huge for us. As you know, if you've been following us for a long time, that's extremely, extremely important. You can use the Legion link in our show notes. They're on our bio on social. And you can also type in the code FSPOD at checkout for 20% off your first order, or double points on every order after that.
Freaking beautiful. I didn't even realize how perfectly that lined up with today's
it's awesome
episode. I was gonna say, can we take, like, it's so cool because, like, how many supplement companies out there, I'll give you a hint, less than like 2 or 3, actually give portions of their proceeds to fund future scientific literature. They fund a lot of Bill Campbell's research at the University of South Florida to keep pushing this industry forward. I mean, it's just us being big on evidence-based to really help just cut through the BS. Like, it's just huge that a company actually takes part of their dime and actually put your money where your mouth is. They care about evidence-based. They care about it. They actually give money to it, which is so freaking cool.
It's huge and it's rare. So
today. Oh, extremely rare. You know what's even more rare? Having 2 cool people like us talk to you about this. That was stupid.
Don't cut that out.
But today, keeping that today, big episode. I know it's late East Coast time, Marianna. I'm getting a little shut down. How you feeling?
No, we're just ready to go. It's like I've just woken up. I'm ready to begin.
Oh.
No, we're getting a little goofy. So we're kicking in the giggles, but we got this. I'm actually so excited to talk about these studies today.
I know the ones you pulled. I'm excited to look forward, because, again, I don't know what you guys know. We don't look at these separate. The studies that each of us pull, we don't look at them separate until they kind of come up here. So this is the first time that we are actually being told and walked through these. So I saw just the titles that Marianna is using, and she's seen mine, and I know I got pretty freaking excited because it's a topic that I've gotten more into over the years, but there's so much just crap on the internet about it, which I'm really excited for you
especially
to
recently
cover. So how about so let's not waste any MFing time and go into it. Let's go study number 1. And I think the first 2 you're going to kind of feed
they blend together.
Into each other.
So I'll move into the second one before Tony gets to his.
Okay.
So
Perfect.
I'll be diving into the effects of dietary fiber on overall metabolic health. So the first study that I'll be looking at is actually a systematic review. So looking at multiple studies, reviewing them. This is different from a meta-analysis. So this is looking at the conclusions already drawn from multiple similar studies versus going in and looking for certain studies that meet specific criteria and drawing conclusions from a large amount of studies. So a review is almost just kind of like what we are doing right now, kind of speaking about them, pulling the bigger points, drawing conclusions. And then the next one I'll get into is a meta-analysis. So what this systematic review was looking at is trying to understand the mechanisms behind the reported health effects of dietary fiber. So I'm sure you've heard often that fiber is good for you, and you've maybe heard a lot of reasons why. Maybe you haven't heard an extension of that, but it is largely good for your metabolic health. So that's kind of looking at your overall like cholesterol levels and looking at your blood glucose levels, your lipid profile, a lot of those blood biomarkers that you've maybe heard us talk about before to tell you kind of what's going on the inside from an overall health perspective.
Thank you for covering that. I think a lot of people, just to say it real quick, you hear metabolism, you just think, oh, how many calories do I burn? How you metabolize different metabolic process in the body. That's what this study is looking at, not just like how many calories you burn. Okay, awesome. So this is really cool.
A lot of that is fiber's health benefits have actually been well established for quite some time. However, the why behind it, like what's actually happening, how is this happening, is still kind of wishy-washy. And you'll find after I go through this that it's still being explored, even though this is an older study. I think it was like 7 or 8 years ago. I'm going to have to double check that. But first, to clarify, dietary fiber is all of the edible parts of a plant or similar type of carbohydrate. We're really going to focus on plants here that are resistant to the digestion and absorption in the small intestine. So human beings do not digest fiber. Our microbes in our gut, the bacteria in our gut, certain specific ones, digest dietary fiber. And I'll be talking about that a little bit more in the next study, but I wanted to clear that up because I feel like a lot of people don't really know that. So individual components of dietary fiber have shown to significantly play a role in improving human health. And these components are, I'm not going to try and pronounce the first one because I did try earlier today and I couldn't do it.
Freaking try it. I've had to try. I said the word, I said a word like 50 times last time. Try it.
Arabinoxolin. Okay.
Nailed it.
I have no idea.
Just kidding. I don't even know how to pronounce it.
More familiar ones: inulin, beta-glucan, pectin, bran, which that's probably you're more familiar with, like wheat bran, and resistant starches. So those were the specific components of dietary fiber they were looking at from plants. Okay, we're not talking about fiber supplements, which is a completely different world that maybe I'll have to review some studies more in the future. And so they were looking at these specific components of dietary fibers effect on human health and kind of the mechanisms there. So a large majority of the research reviewed here found an inverse relationship between fiber consumption and the risk for coronary heart disease, along with several types of cancer. So what does that mean? As fiber consumption increases, the risk for coronary heart disease and certain types of cancer decreases. So because there are so many studies that have replicated this across the board, the FDA actually adopted and published this claim, this finding, that increased consumption of dietary fiber can reduce the prevalence of heart disease and cancer. So I think that's really huge because you think about, like the FDA reports a lot, but there's a lot that they don't report. There has to be a vast amount of replicated human studies having this exact same finding. So that's really significant. And that
is huge.
But the why behind this is still a bit unclear, but it is thought, and it has been shown in a few studies, there still needs to be a few more to replicate these same findings. But the increasing bile acid excretion, so bile is produced, I'm not really going to get into them. It can get really, really complicated, but the increased excretion of bile decreased. I'm going to get down a rabbit hole, and it's going to kind of be like.
Okay. I just saw on a show they did bile cheesecake. It was like on a disgusting food that they had to challenge, and that was their second ranked most disgusting food was bile cheesecake, where they put bile on cheesecake.
That's interesting.
So that's the rabbit hole. End of the rabbit hole.
Okay, so like just a general explanation of its role. So bile is like a greenish yellow fluid, and it holds waste products, cholesterol, and bile salts. So it carries cholesterol, and it can carry cholesterol away from the liver. So its role is to carry away waste, which is what you want. You don't want to bring that towards your organs. So that's one of the possible explanations, is that bile increases in excretion. And then another is the decreased caloric intake, which we've briefly touched on before about how fiber can increase your feelings of fullness, specifically soluble fiber, because when it's in your digestive system, it expands. And this can send signals to your brain that you're full with fewer calories, to say if you had a meal without fiber. Another possible explanation is the increased short chain fatty acid production. So that is from the good gut bacteria. So good gut bacteria, when they're digesting fiber, they produce short chain fatty acids as a byproduct. So that's a sign that these individuals have more good gut bacteria in their microbiome. And then the increased antioxidants that come with high fiber plant foods. So this is a huge point right here. People are always like, oh, can I just take a fiber supplement? Isn't the same thing? Well, you're not getting all of the other benefits from the plant foods this fiber is coming from, and the increased vitamins and minerals. So there's a lot of possible and well-proven explanations for this. But again, this needs to be replicated more in human studies. And there's a lot of actually active research going on right now, even though the study was a few years ago. So they also found a decreased risk of obesity and type 2 diabetes with increased fiber consumption. So a lot of that possible explanations are going back to, again, the decreased caloric intake as part of increased fiber consumption. The viscosity characteristics of fiber, so how viscous it is, that's what I was talking about, it forming a gel. So this is soluble specifically.
Yeah, like chia seeds, right? They're like gelatinous
and that's the most likely mode of action here, especially for the obesity. But also with type 2 diabetes, this can really help delay a blood sugar spike after a meal. So, and this is well noted too. The FDA reports this too, in terms of high fiber diets can decrease your risk for type 2. And also with increased fiber consumption, you decrease nutrient absorption, which may sound like a bad thing, but this sometimes overconsumption of food requires energy, right? So this makes more energy available. I'm going to put that in layman's terms. Yes.
Okay, so inverse a little bit. Okay, that makes more sense.
Dang.
So let me just get back on that, because that's huge. I mean, so we're talking about coronary heart disease, certain forms of cancer, type 2 diabetes, which I'll even say as a type 1 diabetic, when I had a continuous blood glucose monitor, it's easy to tell high fiber versus low fiber meals. And I hate when people say, oh, you don't want your blood sugar to spike. It's like every time, blood sugar rises and then falls, people are like, oh, it's a spike and a dip, it's bad for you. It's like, no, that's your natural bodily response. When you have fiber, if it didn't spike, that'd be almost a bad thing. But fiber does elongate and kind of dampen the line instead of like a shorter one, like high fiber meals. I would notice that, and I think it's kind of cool when you actually see the data. You're like, oh. And I was like, because I don't know if you mentioned this part. Do you think that might have something to do with it and like just overall satiety too, is just slowing down how you're digesting your food?
It slows digestion. Piece, right? That's what fiber does. It slows digestion. Yeah, absolutely huge. These are all huge points, and I feel like I just briefly touched on these because there is so much more research out there kind of diving into the specifics of these studies that are reviewed here. So actually in our next Patreon research review that we'll be releasing on every Friday, we'll have a research review, Tony and I, but that is going to be the topic there, just fiber and overall health. So the health benefits of fiber, talking about the mechanisms, how also this is really the hugest point of our research reviews, how you can apply this to your life. So how can I increase my fiber? How can I increase it in a slow enough manner so that I don't cause digestive distress? What foods are high in fiber? And
the entire lifestyle point of view from it, not just this, but the entire conglomerate of data. Because this is an awesome freaking review. This is an incredible review. I mean, this is large. I mean, that's a lot of pieces. And like you said, for the FDA to make changes, I mean, we've had side conversations for hours about the FDA and how it actually makes changes. And we're like that's a very big deal if it can draw conclusions especially like the increased dietary fiber can reduce the prevalence of coronary heart. That's not a lightly said, like, oh, we saw a study, let's make a change.
What pisses me off, though,
like this
Tony,
is a powerful
what
review.
pisses me off, and I'm sure it pisses you off too, though, is the standard American diet is extremely low in fiber, like so low in fiber. I mean, processed foods are stripped of their fiber. It just is. And having it not be readily accessible, it's just so, the FDA, we'll say all the time, something isn't FDA approved, you maybe want to look into that. But at the same time, the FDA, who recommends increasing your fiber, can also have a lot of control over regulations around food processing in the food processing industry and how you take out fiber, what foods are readily available, going into the extension of people who may be low income and don't have access to fruits and veggies, how much money they can get for fruits and veggies. Like, it pisses me off. Sorry. Just had to say that.
I was going to say, we could do a Grinds My Gears episode. That would be yours. I would say that. Let's reel it back in. Let's reel back in. Let's go to the next. Okay, so because your next one is kind of feeding off of this one.
They're pretty similar, right? But this one is a meta-analysis looking at dietary fiber, which the gut microbiota, which I briefly mentioned but didn't really get into the specifics of, and metabolic regulation in human randomized trials. So the review didn't only include RCTs, which are the gold standard. So this one is just human randomized trials, specifically looking at the gut microbiota and how that may impact your metabolic regulation in certain populations of people. So the goal of this meta-analysis was to summarize the human randomized controlled intervention studies investigating the effects of dietary fiber on the gut microbiota and your overall metabolic health. So in this meta-analysis, metabolic regulation is discussed with respect to markers relating to glycemic regulation and lipid metabolism. So that is specifically what they're referring to here. And I'll get into the specifics about how they looked at that right now. So they included 16 studies. And the markers of glycemic regulation were glucose, insulin, hemoglobin A1C, a few others, HOMA, IR. I'm not going to say the whole word there.
I know, I see that there. I'm like, let's do it. Let me see her here.
GLP-1, so glucagon-like peptide 1. I'm not sure if anyone listens to Andrew Huberman, but he mentions GLP-1 all the time. It's important. And then lipid metabolism looked at total cholesterol, low-density lipoprotein cholesterol, which is your LDL, and then your high-density lipoprotein, which is your HDL cholesterol, your triglycerides, and then your non-esterified fatty acids, which I know some people are like, what are you talking about? I just want to point out that looking at the fatty acid profile, that is very rare. That's like a very rare biomarker to be able to look at and have access to, and it's very important. So I'll just leave that note there.
Thank you for the review. It's like,
I won't dive into too much of that. But all right, so what they did, so they looked at healthy, normal weight people, and what they found was that the intake of fiber resulted in changes in the gut microbiota in 4 of the 5 studies that looked at this healthy, normal weight population.
Okay.
And they saw beneficial changes in the metabolic factors that I just mentioned above in 3 of these 4 studies. So that means that across the board, so I don't need to get too into the weeds here. And again, I'll be diving deeper into this in our review. But 3 of the studies across the board showed significant improvements in these markers of glycemic regulation and lipid. So all of those weird words I just mentioned above, they saw improvements there. So that's huge. 3 of the 5 studies.
That's big for all of them.
Yeah, and these
too.
are healthy, already healthy individuals. So, and their efforts were also to kind of look at and explain maybe the why, kind of like above, and similar things. You see shifts in short chain fatty acid production from these strains of good gut bacteria. And this was mainly after intake of whole grains and barley. So that was interesting there. And then in the overweight, obese groups, 4 out of the 6 studies showed changes in microbiota And these changes, when I say changes, improvements. So an increase in beneficial gut bacteria. And the metabolic risk factors improved in 3 out of the 5 studies. So again, that's just a summary of saying there were significant improvements in those biomarkers that I mentioned earlier. And then they also looked at individuals with metabolic related disorders. And all studies showed changes in the microbiota after fiber intake. And I believe, I don't know why I didn't even write this down, but I'd have to do the math. But all of the studies showed beneficial changes. And they had a decrease in metabolic markers related to glycemic regulation or lipid metabolism. So this was found in 4 of the studies. So that means, decrease in metabolic markers. So say if your hemoglobin A1C was really high, it's recommended to try and lower that. And
yeah, that's just for those at home, like hemoglobin H1C, HbA1c is your pretty much elevated blood glucose over the past 3 months. It's one of the major markers to tell if you're diabetic, pre-diabetic, non-diabetic, or if you're heading that way. So you can
keep in mind,
so
this
that's
is
a big number.
Individuals with metabolic related disorders, some of those being type 2 diabetics. That is huge. Increasing your fiber intake to lower your hemoglobin A1C.
It's a hard number to, it's like a hard number to lower. It takes months and months of work. So for just fiber intake to make a change with that is huge.
And then also changes in their blood lipid profile. So decreasing their LDL cholesterol, triglycerides. I'm not sure if they didn't see any changes in HDL cholesterol, which is your good cholesterol. But again, with metabolic related disorders, the first goal is going to be reducing LDL, especially if you have a risk factor for cardiovascular disease. That is the first goal there. And this is because both in all of these situations, they saw increased microbial diversity, and this helps increase the short chain fatty acid production. So, and then they saw, I also noted that they also saw decreased diversity, and this is in certain bacteria. So there is also, you can have an overgrowth of bad bacteria. I don't really have a better name for it. There really isn't one, but there is too much of bad bacteria. And oftentimes you will see that in people with certain chronic diseases, metabolic disorders. And so they did see a decrease in those species there. So I just think that is so cool that they're specifically looking at gut health, microbiome, and these metabolic markers. So it's kind of going the extra level. And this review is from 2022. So, yeah.
Very recent. Well, the metabolic markers are what impresses me the most out about those studies.
Yes.
Like that's
and that you see, I mean, I love it when they split up by group, especially because it's like you can't put people with type 2 diabetes in the same category as a healthy person.
No.
But seeing changes across the board for all of the groups. And I kind of like to talk about what this means is that dietary fiber can change your gut microbiome along with alter your metabolic regulation. So altering these really important biomarkers.
These are huge. Yeah.
So I just think
that's massive. That would blow.
I feel like I said a lot of big words, but when you get into the gut microbiome, unfortunately, that's just kind of like what happens.
Yeah. No, you did a good job breaking it down. Okay. So kind of like Marianna just did, her 2 studies kind of fed off each other. Mine, exact same way. So what I did is I pulled a small scale study, 18 resistance trained men. And I looked at a larger meta-analyses and systematic review with 21 different studies covered in there. So I did them both, and they were both, it's kind of interesting enough. If you guys are in the evidence-based world, you recognize the name Brad Schoenfeld. I always mess that up, but Brad Schoenfeld, you recognize that name. He's huge in hypertrophy and strength training. So he actually was the leader of both of these pieces. Now, the first one, and what both of these are going to look at, is muscle hypertrophy, meaning, and anything for anything to hypertrophy means to grow in size. So it's not just like a muscle hypertrophy kind of thing. It is, if you have a water balloon and you keep filling it with water, you could technically say like, oh, you're noticing hypertrophy in that water balloon as it goes. But that's typically referred to as hypertrophy training, or her hypertrophy style training is typically training geared towards growth in muscle size. And just to set up a little background, I know anyone, especially, I mean, this is the most annoying part to me, throw back to the CPT days, right? Getting your personal training certification, they teach you very rigidly, right? 8 to 12 reps is the hypertrophy range. If you want to build muscle, you need to train in 8 to 12 rep range, right? No lower, that's just for strength. No higher, that's for endurance. You can train there, but don't expect to build muscle, or at least significant muscle, right? That's been taught in so many textbooks and so many CPTs. It's ridiculous. Now, when this research came out, it did blow my mind a little bit, because that's everything that we've been taught for so long. And when this started coming out over the last decade, it started to completely reshape how we saw rep ranges. So we've always kind of taught that different rep ranges mean different things, and the style of your training should change due to that. Now, the first one is a smaller scale study that I mentioned. It was looking at the effects of low versus high load resistance training on muscle strength and hypertrophy. And this is in well-trained men. So not beginners, not newbies, because we've talked about newbie gains several times before on the podcast, correct? So this first study is smaller scale, the smaller scale one I mentioned. It is looking at the effects of low versus high load resistance training on muscle strength and hypertrophy in well-trained men. And we've had this conversation, I think, who did we just have it with? Alan was one recently. We've had it on a couple of different podcasts on the term of like newbie gains, where if you are brand new to resistance training in particular, your body adapts and makes changes a lot differently than it will in 1, 2, 3, 4 years from now. It's one of those rare phases if you're a newbie where you can both lose fat and build significant muscle at the same time, known as recomposition. Where if you're a trained individual, like these gentlemen were well-trained individuals training for years, you can usually, the idea of recomposition or doing both at the same time is kind of a pipe dream. Not impossible, but more of a pipe dream, or at least not efficient. You just don't make changes as frequently. So I thought that was important that this was in well-trained men and not in untrained individuals, because untrained individuals, you could test them out with different metrics when it comes to strength training, and you're going to see similar progress no matter what. Now, it was done with 18 young men. They were matched and assigned to a baseline strength and then randomly assigned to one of two experimental groups. This one's pretty simple. A low load, right? So lower weight routine with 25 to 30 repetitions done. They were performed per set per exercise. So 25 to 35 reps per set per exercise, or a high load routine, right? Higher weight routine where 8 to 12 reps were performed for each set per exercise. Okay. Now, during each of these sessions, subjects in both groups performed 3 sets of 7 different exercises representing all major muscle groups. Along with that, training was performed 3 times per week on non-consecutive days for a total of 8 weeks. So this was a decent sized study on muscle hypertrophy, right? It's 8 weeks long. It was 2 months. You're not going to notice muscle changes in 1 to 2 weeks. It's just not going to happen. But over 8 weeks, you start to get a good look. Now, the important note here that I'll pull together in the next piece of research is that all of these were taken to I don't even know this, pretty much right up to muscular failure. So the weights that were used, doesn't matter if it's 8 to 12 reps or 25 to 35 reps, it was taken right up to muscular failure. That's a very important note that will come in later. Now, the important thing on this study, and it was small scale, so you're like, okay, what does this mean? Is that both groups saw no significant difference in muscle thickness gains or muscle hypertrophy. They both gained significant but equal amounts of muscle size. One caveat is that the high load group, so the heavier weight group, did see a much greater gain in strength than the low load group. So both groups saw equal muscle size gains, equal muscle hypertrophy gains, but on top of the size gains, the heavier weighted group also noticed increase in strength gains. So that's something interesting to look at. Now, this next piece was strength and hypertrophy adaptations between low and high load resistance training. This is a systematic review and meta-analysis, again, performed by BRAD. This one...
No, don't say that.
A freaking BRAD, my boy. He's my... BRAD, get out of here. So this was done over 21 different studies looking at that same exact topic. Okay, so it wasn't just 18 kids. It was 21 different studies, and they ultimately included for analysis that all, and this is, what it takes to be a part of this analysis, was that all sets in the training, in all different studies, all different protocols were performed with that same momentary muscular failure for a minimum of at least 6 weeks, and at least one method of estimating changes in muscle mass or dynamic isometric or isokinetic strength. So that's what it took to be included in this review. Okay. The outcomes across 21 studies, and this is what they concluded, is that gains in 1 repetition max strength were significantly in favor of high load versus low load training, meaning groups using heavier weights. It was very much in favor that they would all increase strength much more than low load or low weight groups. Muscle hypertrophy was similar between all rep ranges across the study. And in the studies, they were testing as low as 1 to 3 repetitions, 6 repetitions, 8 to 12 repetitions, 20 to 35 repetitions. So from 1 to 35, they noticed that muscle hypertrophy was just about the same, right? No significant differences. Now, what these findings indicate is that max strength benefits are obtained from using heavier loads, right? That's no shocker. You have to lift heavier weights if you want to get stronger lifting heavier weights. But this is the mind-blowing part that this started to redefine how we looked at rep ranges, is no one rep range is better at building muscle. Now, what you notice when you look at all these groups, and especially in the review, is the things that do matter. So you're like, well, how many freaking reps should I do? What does that mean? What does matter is total training volume measured in sets, or more specifically, how many sets per muscle group per week, which we've talked about a few times before, and how closely you are taking those sets to failure. Okay, so how intense, and that's what something you'd measure called intensity, how close to failure you are working on these sets, showing pretty much if you're hitting the total training volume as far as sets per week, and you're taking each of those sets close to failure, you're going to see equal hypertrophy gains at any rep range you choose on the surface. Now, I have some notes on the side of this, because what does this all mean? And it's important to kind of highlight these things. Just because each different rep range can make equal hypertrophy gains, when we're talking about the things that do matter, close to failure, hitting total training volume, we've talked about this before. Solid range is around 10 to 20 hard sets per muscle group per week. That's the optimal training volume you probably want to be in. Any more and you're not getting too much out of it, any less and you're not going to see significant growth at all. So 10 to 20 hard sets per muscle group per week to elicit growth if your diet and everything else is aligned. Now, on those hard sets, one important factor is if you're training at a very high volume, 25 to 35 repetitions, and you're taking it close to failure. And I'm going to ask you this, like the last time, do you remember the last time you used a lighter weight and went close to failure at like 30 plus reps? You are burning. You're on fire, whatever you're doing.
I was
after
probably
one
at a
set.
Barry's. I was probably at a Barry's.
A freaking berries
class.
are like an orange theory. But after one set, you're like, holy crap. You're fatigued. You're burning. You're on fire. What does that mean? Because after 8 to 12, you got that burn. You're feeling good, but you're not like dead, exhausted.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? If you're taking things at all high repetitions too far and all the time, you're going to take a lot longer between sets that's a fact. You're going to need longer to recover to give the same intensity set after set. Where if you're working at a moderate rep range, you don't need as long to recover because you're not taken to a near death point that you are with those higher repetition ranges. Okay, so that's something to kind of notice, because what does that really mean? You're going to spend less total time in the gym if you're not using those high reps all the time, or inverse, if you're using high repetitions all the time. In order to hit what matters, which is how many sets per week, you're going to need to spend much longer in the gym, which for a lot of people is not conducive with their lifestyle, with work, with family, with things like that. Usually the less time in the gym is what you want. Now, same thing on the extremes on the other end. If you're always training with between your 1 and 3 repetition max, there's a few things we know. One, your recovery time overall increases, not just between sets, but between days that you exercise, because you're putting such a heavier load and more demand on your skeletal system and your muscular system. It takes a lot longer to recover from, right? If you're going for strength in the gym to maintain weight, you need 3 to 5 minutes to rest in between those sets. So here's what I kind of draw from this. And I think it's kind of like be a big almost loop in a circle is, no, you don't need to stay within 8 to 12 reps for muscle hypertrophy, but it just so happens to be those moderate rep ranges are kind of hitting a sweet spot to make it easier to do what matters, to take those weights to close to muscular failure, to maintain your form and efficiency without breaking down like it usually does in those higher repetition sets, and to just be more efficient with your time in the gym so you don't have to spend an hour and a half to 2 hours weight training 4 or 5 times a week to hit your total training volume. So can you make equal size gains at any rep range? Yes. And that's why I think you should probably vary with rep ranges in your sets. But to nail down efficiency, a large portion of your training might want to be from those mid rep ranges, maybe all the way 6 to 15 if you want to consider mid. So those studies blew my mind just because it redefined what everyone has been taught for so long. It redefines what people have been taught for so long about hypertrophy training.
I remember like just this, I didn't dive as I've never dove this deep into it, but first hearing about this, I was like, I have these feelings all the time in this space with research because it's always evolving. And I think that's like also just a takeaway. It goes to show like you can't, especially if you're a professional in this space, if you're coaching, if you have any sort of application helping anyone, like you cannot get stuck in your ways with anything. Like
no. That's a perfect, you can't get stuck because so many times I think, and this is for any coach listening too, I get all the time this question, like, how can I become the best coach I can be? How do I grow a successful business coaching? How do I do like anything like that? And here's what I see, the number one mistake I see most of the time is people will either get their degree or they'll get their CPT. And then they just focus on getting more clients and getting more clients and getting that. And they completely forget the continued education portion that is so necessary to succeed long-term as a coach and as a trainer. And I think just people appreciate it more and kind of align with that because it doesn't matter if you used to preach that you had to train 8 to 12 for hypertrophy, because that was, to the best of our collective knowledge, what you should be doing. And I think you want a coach who's not stuck in old ways, where if there's something that challenges what we previously thought, you should be able to, with ample evidence, change your views and your approach based on that. It's absolutely huge. Great point for tired Marianna. Great point.
I know, I'm starting to lose it.
She's fading fast. We can tell from a facial
We've
expression.
had such a productive afternoon.
So productive, and we'll end it on a productive note. So let's wrap this one up. That was a little different studies that blew our mind, but I still love the stuff that we're talking about. Again, the research review on our Patreon, we're going to be reviewing dietary fiber intake even more in depth this next week after this airs. And there's a full catalog of everything that we've done in the past. So all the previous research reviews and all the future will all be kept in one place too. So if you're interested, we put that in our bio that you can go check out. It's just $5 a month. And we do research every single week on Fridays. We come out with them. Y'all know where else to find us. Y'all, fs.pod on Instagram, on TikTok, fitness stuff for normal people on YouTube. The single most, what do I say every day? The single most important thing that we are thankful for you guys is the 5-star review you leave us on Apple, on Spotify, on all those. Every single time.
You guys are holding your own, to be honest. Talking about coming through with the reviews.
Coming in hot. Like, I freaking love it. And especially being able to read through them on Apple. I know Spotify, you can't read through those, but...
Wait, you can read through...
On Apple, on Apple you can read through. So you guys are so freaking... Even just if you don't have kind words to say and you do leave a review, it is massive. It pushes it to a larger audience.
609 5-star reviews?
Yeah.
That's insane.
It's huge. So thank y'all for that, because you guys don't our mission is literally... It sucks because our mission is not like a lot of people's mission. Like, it's to impact as many people as possible, and the best way to do that is through free, longer form platforms like this to really educate. And that is the best thing that you guys can do that helps our podcast reach more people. So thank you guys so much for that. We are forever in debt, but that's what we all got for you. Go have a productive evening or rest of your day, depending on what time you're listening to it. Marianna's going to take a quick power nap before she finishes up for the evening, and we'll talk to y'all next week. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.